it was just a surprise. I was expecting you to say several.
Good evening, everyone. We will get started in just a moment. I'm just letting everyone get into the Zoom space, but thank you so much for being here with us this evening. All right. So we're going to get started. We have a good number in here where we can continue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Roseanne Santos. I am the Director of Alumni Engagement here at John Jay College, and I am so happy that you're here with us today. I always say you can be anywhere right now, and you've chosen to spend an hour with us, developing yourself and making sure that you're gonna meet your dreams and be successful. So I'm very grateful for that, and it's not lost upon me that you're sharing your time with us. So this evening, we are going to talk about interview prep strategies. If you're not getting interviews, if you're getting a ton of interviews, but you're not getting the job, all of those things can cause a great deal of frustration. But our alum, Arkiem Legree, who works in the HR space, and he does coaching for people in your demographic, young alums, soon to be graduates. He is going to give you an amazing presentation on some preparation strategies so that you can knock their socks off when you get that interview. So without further ado, I introduce to you a fellow alum, if you're already an alum, and if you're going to be an alum, you will join him as an alum, Arkiem Legree. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot, Roseanne. Thanks for the intro. Appreciate that. Makes me feel special.
You are special.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. I just want to kind of echo what Roseanne just stated. Our evenings they go so fast, and before you know it, it's the next day. So thanks for taking some time and spending some time with us. I have a lot of information to share. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple of things, and hopefully from there, I'll save some time for some Q&A, or I can stay behind for some Q&A as well. I wanted to start off just kind of by introducing myself. So my name is Arkiem Legree. I graduated from John Jay in 2016. That's the short of it all. There is a little bit more of the story too, and I want to give you that also. So we'll start with the agenda. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my story because I do think it ties back into this process. A lot of what I teach on the interview side comes from part of my experience in HR, but also part of my experience from pretty much interviewing, applying, and working just about everywhere. Like I've worked pretty much everywhere, or pretty close to it. So I have the applied experience, but I also have kind of like that academic experience. So I'm happy to share that with you guys today. We'll go through some interview types because I want to make sure that the preparation that you take into certain interview types will change depending on the focus of the interview. And then we'll touch on a few strategies, and I'll hopefully have some time left for some Q&A. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey because this is kind of where it all starts. Now, I entered John Jay in 2001. So if you remember, I said I graduated in 2016. So it took me 15 years. And believe it or not, that's fairly common. Like a lot of people, especially with New York City schools, we work full time, we have families to take care of, we go part-time, we go super part-time, we take one class, drop a semester, come back. It happens. I'm telling you, it happened to me. It didn't necessarily stop the bag, so to speak. I continue to earn money and be successful. So I do want to bring that out there. So I entered John Jay in 2001. I wanted to be a lawyer. You couldn't tell me that I wasn't going to law school. I watched enough TV, and I knew I liked to argue and I liked to talk to people. And at the core, that's what I thought a lawyer did. So that's why I wanted to go into law school. I left school at the end of my first semester and focused on work. I was living on my own, living full time. I didn't have time to do both, and I wasn't necessarily focused. So I focused on earning money. I spent the first 5 years out of, I used to say right out of high school, working in retail. I quickly worked up the ranks and went into leadership positions, focused on sales, operations, and training. And that, little did I know that that would be my first introduction to the HR side of it as well. I reached a ceiling. I got all the way up to district manager for a couple of different retailers. Fun fact, the Toys R Us in Times Square, I opened that building and I closed that building. So we do tend to close the loop sometimes, and I'm very proud of that to some extent. Sad that it's closed, but the fact that I got to be a part of that. But I realized that the next step in that process was to go into corporate. That was the logical next step in the retail framework, but they wouldn't allow me in because I didn't have my degree. So I had to leave and kind of find an environment that would allow me to go back to school. If any of you are on the call work retail or have ever worked retail, you know that they want you to have open availability. So sometimes you're working in the day, sometimes you're working at night, sometimes you're working overnight. So it's really hard to maintain studies in that framework. So I had to find a corporate job that would allow me to do so. So I spent about 5 years in corporate operations, started stacking my credits and getting closer to my degree. And my last corporate job was for this little tiny company called Seamless Web. At the time, it was just a software platform used for big corporations to manage meals for their employees who stayed late. It was not a product that was open to consumers. I got to work on the product that would eventually become Seamless and eventually become Grubhub, and kind of changed my trajectory. I got to do a lot of different work for that organization, working in operations, customer service, and in HR in that environment as well. This company actually went liquid, meaning they had a liquidity event, they went public, so to speak. And as a result, my ownership allowed me to take a year or two and focus just on my studies. So I went back to John Jay full time for my last year and racked up all the internships. I worked at an organization within the school called Women in the Public Sector. It's run by two professors in the public administration department, Maria D'Agostino and Nicole Elias. They still run that organization. I worked with them, and through them, I got my internships. I worked for the New York City Office of Emergency Management. I got a fellowship to go to Washington, D.C. for a semester with the Partnership for Public Service. So I got direct access to the Hill and working for federal agencies. And then right before graduation, I was awarded the internship with UN Women, which is the United Nations wing that's focused on preventing violence against women and other women-focused I guess you could say, efforts. And through those, I realized that, one, I didn't necessarily want to stay on the government side. I didn't want to stay in the public sector. I did like private sector work, but I knew I wanted to stay in HR. And that led to opportunities with Apple, led to opportunities with Sprint. I focused more on getting certifications instead of getting my master's degree. I did get accepted into John Jay's MPA program, and I decided to pause, and I'm still pausing. I will go back eventually. I'm currently the senior HR business partner for Kiwi Partners. It's an HR consultancy that serves nonprofits across the tri-state area. So depending on the client, I could be their HR generalist. There are clients where I work side by side with the board, trying to figure out how an organization grows or reduces in size, and other organizations that are transforming their digital stack or their software setups. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis now. But I say all that to say, and I show you all that in detail for a number of reasons. One, it's good practice. I think everyone should practice telling their story sometimes, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But two, my story was not linear. It wasn't a straightforward, got your undergrad in 4 years, but I was still very successful. So if there's anybody on this call who can resonate, and I feel like there's always someone, just know that your story is yours to craft, and it's yours to develop, and it can be totally different, and you can find success in it. So what you're looking at now is what I call the career management cycle. So we break up this process into 4 pieces. Today, we're going to be talking about interviewing, which I call phase 3. There are things that you should be doing ahead of time. So for every slide from here now, we're going to talk from the framework that you got the interview or you secured the interview, and this is the things that you need to do to prepare. However, we're going to operate under the assumption that you've already done phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is story crafting. That's you figuring out what your story is, how you want to tell it, how do you craft it so that it ties into the role that you're applying to, and then documenting it, making sure that you have a long form of your biography, a short form in form of an elevator pitch, your resume, and any portfolio or supporting documentation that helps you. That's going to kind of help you try to figure out the research side, which is phase 2, or I call it exploration. That's going to help you figure out what industry you want to go into. What size organization do you want to work for? I'm looking at the chat. Yes, Career Center is a great a great resource for phase 1. Fun fact, so the Partnership for Public Service Internship, the Office of Emergency Management Internship, and the UN Women got them all in the Career Center. So I know when we're at school, and I know when we're in the when we're going from class to class, I know there's stuff on the bulletin boards and stuff on the elevators. Obviously, we don't see them right now because we're in the remote space. Look at those signs, look at those things, because all those opportunities came to me directly from John Jay. Phase 2 is where you're trying to figure out what industries you want to go into. And I purposely went into different internships to decide which industry I wanted to land in. And I eventually wound up in the for-profit setting. But the best things to do in that situation are try to have some informational interviews as well. Those are conversational. They don't necessarily lead to direct opportunities, but they give you an idea of how you can see yourself in that environment going forward. And then from there, you kind of figure out which roles you want to apply to. I do recommend to people that it is quality over quantity. You don't want to apply to every role that comes your way. You want to focus on things that are geared more towards you and asking those questions about where you want to work and the type of environments that you want to work in. I worked at an Amazon, I worked at Apple. They're really big, large, some would say even admirable companies, but they didn't do well for me as far as my growth was concerned. I thrived in a smaller environment, but I had to try those out and have those conversations with people in order to figure that out. We're going to discuss phase 3, which is the interviewing piece of it. And then phase 4 is what we call relationship management or networking. I put this in a cycle for a reason. This never ends. Whether you have the job, you're pursuing the job, or you already have the job, you're going to be doing some element of this through in every part of your process. When you have the job, you're networking, you're updating your resume, you're writing performance reviews, you're going after promotions, you're trying to build your network. I broke up my experience and the places I worked into 2 sections for a reason. The first set of jobs that I got, or the positions that I got, were all places that I applied to directly. That second slide were all positions that I got as a result of referrals. People referred me to those things, and you get those through networking. So, and we're going to touch on networking a lot because it's really important. It goes hand in hand with interviewing. I'm just going to take a minute and check the chat. I see some things popping up. Okay. Roseanne's putting in some tips because you should go to as many alumni events as possible. I've met some really great people through that pool of people, and those can be your next colleagues. You just never know. So there are at least 10 or more different types of interviews that you will experience depending on the type of role that you are applying to, the type of work you're going to be doing, and in the organization that you're going to. However, they typically fall into 3 different purposes. There's usually the screening, and that's just to confirm that you qualify, that you have the basic qualifications. That's, confirming the things that you said on your resume are actually true, confirming that you can meet the requirements on the job description. They are confirming salary information at that point. They're confirming that you can get to the location if it's a job that's in-house. Most of these interviews are conducted usually over the phone or in a remote setting. You don't necessarily have to go into those, but there is some preparation that has to happen there. The key here is you want to use that opportunity to ask the recruiter or whoever you're talking to any recommendations on how to proceed through the interview process. They have visibility to what the interview process is going to look like. And they like when you ask that question because it shows that you're engaged. The next set of interviews, and it could be 1 extra interview, it could be several, depending on the organization that you're applying to, they are trying to vet your ability to meet the technical standards of the organization. A lot of these interviews are usually the behavioral interview type where you are asked a lot of questions and you're supposed to answer using some level of scenario showing that you can do the work that they're expecting you to do. However, for more technical roles, you'll see case studies where you'll have to respond to a case study or a scenario that's presented to you. Google is very popular for giving you a puzzle, and you have to solve a puzzle or solve a quiz. The consulting firms, the bigger ones, will invite you to dinner. And you may think you're just there for a party, and they're really just trying to see your ability to build relationships, engage with other people. So you're always interviewing, and they come in different forms. So be aware of those. And then the final set of interviews or the final interview process is to assess the fit for the organization. And this is where they're trying to match your skills to the skills that are needed. It doesn't necessarily mean that you check off every box. There are many people, and as a member of the hiring team, there will be many qualified candidates, but we're also looking for that candidate that's going to thrive or has the highest likelihood to thrive in that particular environment. And sometimes that's not the person with the most experience. Sometimes it's the person who's more willing to learn. Sometimes that's the person who's a little bit more flexible. You just never know. And that's why I always say you should apply to roles, even if you don't check off every box in the job description, because you have no idea what the organization is willing to compromise on or what they're willing to teach you. So apply to the role if you meet most of the qualifications. Go back one. So now we're going to go through some of the interview prep stages. So in the pre-interview process, you want to make sure that you're researching the organization. And you're researching now in a different way. So you already have your interview. So you want to check news articles. You want to check press releases. You want to see what the organization is doing, what's happening on the company website. That's where you're going to find the organization's mission. That's where you're going to find their values. You can Google, there are other sites kind of like Glassdoor that can kind of give you a snapshot of the experience of what it may be like to work in that organization. That's going to give you some visibility. And you want to tie that information to your circumstances. This is how I pick the roles that I want to apply for. Do I want to work for an organization where the workday is a 12-hour day versus a 7-hour day? Do I want to work for an organization that's going to allow that it's going to expect me to do one thing over and over and over again for all the time that I'm there? Or are they going to stretch me and allow me to learn different things? You can find out some of that just by doing research or using LinkedIn. You can run a search on LinkedIn, run a Boolean search. You'll be surprised how many people are in your network or connected to your network just by being a member of John Jay, but also being a graduate from a City University of New York. That you could reach out to and ask for information about what it's like to work in that environment. The other thing you want to do is confirm as much of the interview details as possible. You want to know who you're interviewing with. If you can get the information as to what roles they currently work in the organization, before I start preparing for an interview, I do this search because you never know whose background aligns with yours or what experience aligns with yours as well. And nowadays, everyone has a LinkedIn, or if you don't, you should. That's where you can get some of that information as well. And then you also want to know what type of interview you're going into. Is it going to be a phone interview? Is it going to be video? Is it going to be in person? You prepare for those things in different ways. So if it's a phone interview, I think the big thing is to eliminate all distractions. If it's going to be a video interview, make sure that you can be seen. I've been playing around with my lighting all day. When I'm with clients, it doesn't matter so much if I can't be seen, but I wanted to make sure I made eye contact with you guys. And then if it's an in-person interview, figure out the logistics. Make sure that you've mapped out a couple of different ways to get to the location if you're taking public transportation, because MTA never seems to be working the way it's supposed to. And obviously that's not something that we have to worry about right now in this setting, but you will at some point. And then go over your documentation again. And this is big for a couple of reasons. The resume that you submitted at the beginning might need an update. If there may be other things that you want to convey to an employer that may not have been on the resume that you used to submit, this is a good time to put that into that information into the system. Roseanne said, don't interview while you're driving. You don't know what Wi-Fi will be from the block. That's very true. So unless you absolutely positively have to, and if you do, then I would say put that contextual information up front. I'm in the car, I apologize, and do what you have to do, but try to get to a place where you have reliable Wi-Fi and void of any distractions. Also, in preparing the documents, you also want to go over the job description again. I always confirm that with the person that I'm interviewing with. Here's why. In the private sector, what I tend to see is we will start interviewing for a particular position. And then through the interview process, we'll realize that there's a skill that we didn't put on the job description initially that we may add and re-upload back to the site. So the job description that you use to apply with could be different than the one that you're walking into the interview with. And you want to make sure that that's confirmed. So I would ask the person that you are interviewing with or whoever's confirming the interview to make sure that they give you the most updated information so that you're accurately prepared and you know what you're stepping into. Depending on the role, you may have to provide some supporting documents in addition to your resume and say your cover letter. So I would say start putting your portfolio together, whether that's a digital portfolio and you're providing somebody a link to something, make sure the link is functioning, make sure that they have access to it. I know we have Google, but Google has the firewall. So you have to make sure that that person can access the link, or any of their colleagues should access the link as well. Writing samples. If you are in school right now and you have research papers and written documentation that you scored well on, I'll say, I use my rule is anything that I got an A on, I'm going to keep to the side, because you just never know who might need it. When I was interviewing for the fellowship and the Partnership for Public Service, that was the last thing that they asked me, and I made sure that I had it. Another thing, if you are in school, I like to ask my professors what their policy is for writing recommendations. Every professor is different. You'll have professors who say, if you got an A in my class, I will write a recommendation. You'll also have professors who say, you have to be exceptional in my class, or it's first come, first serve. But when they give out the syllabus, that's the next question that I'm going to ask, because you just never know what you may need, and you'll have it available to you. Any questions so far? Because I know I'm moving kind of fast. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So there are a couple of other things that you want to think about managing when you are preparing for the interview. So one of the things that you want to consider is your environment. So secure a quiet place, check your lighting, check the Wi-Fi, know the locations as much as possible. But the mindset is a big one. So you want to prepare for a conversation. Yes, the people that you're interviewing, have the ability to change your current situation, and that's a fact, but you're there to have a conversation. They picked you for a reason. They picked you to go through the next step in the process. So you want to be prepared to have a full conversation with those people. And you do that by doing the necessary research up front and preparing your notes. So in the research phase, when I'm looking at a job, I'm looking at their mission, I'm looking at their values, I'm looking at what the culture says to the organization. And from that, I'm probably going to generate a few questions to have. They're going to ask you more than likely in an interview, do you have any questions? The worst thing you can do is say you don't have any questions. At least one. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 in a few slides from here, just to have that are really general, but always have at least one question. Practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I call example sandwiches. I'm using the STAR method in a second, because that's where I spend a lot of my time in practice as well for my own interviews. But you also want to be prepared to address opportunities. So let's say you don't meet every qualification on the job description. You should be preparing your responses for that ahead of time. Maybe there's a gap in your employment that may be brought up as a result of how it's positioned on your resume. Be prepared to speak to that as well. Maybe you experienced some adversity that prevented some things or affected your GPA. You don't necessarily have to have those conversations, but it's always helpful to have those conversations with yourself just in case they come up. You can never be over-prepared. And then again, reinforcing that you should prepare questions also. And then I start my follow-up before the interview. So if I've spoken to the person who scheduled my interview and if they've given me names and titles of the people, I'm already starting to craft out what my thank you notes or my thank you letters are going to be. So back in the day when we used to do in-person interviews, it feels like over a year, I would kind of start preparing my thank you card and I would drop it in the mail on when I left out. This way I know a couple of days from there that someone would have gotten it. Nowadays, people are not sending thank you notes as much as possible. I mean, as much as they used to. You're probably going to send an email, and I recommend that you start drafting it and leaving it in. This way you can tie it back to the interview or a segment in the interview. There should be some information in that thank you note that talks to what you discussed in that interview, and that's tied to the questions that you're going to ask them as well. Always be prepared to ask to keep in contact, because this is how you build your network. You just never know where a person is going to go from here, especially if you're a qualified candidate, but let's say you just don't get the role. You never know what other role you may qualify for, but it's your job to remain top of mind to the person that you're speaking to or the people that you're speaking to. And then prepare for any next steps. So if you do move on into the process, prepare for the next interview process as well. So when you go into interviews, and everyone hates this, I still hate it, they're gonna ask you a question, so tell me about yourself, or tell me your story. The worst thing that you can do is not have anything prepared for this conversation. And that's why a few slides ago, I said, write down what your story is. The way I recommend starting this process is to write down your whole story. Use a Google Doc, write it down on paper, write down everything. You can then pick and choose what key parts of your experience you want to tie into the conversation that you want to deliver. But you have that master document that shows all of your experience, whether it's personal experience, whether it's professional experience or academic experience. the more you do this, the more comfortable it'll be when they ask this question, because it's gonna come up. That's how most interviews start. You wanna write it down. I recommend recording it. I would bet that most people on this phone, on this Zoom, have a smartphone, which means you have access to voice memos. You have access to recordings. I know most of you don't even send text messages anymore. You send voice memos and you send videos, or you FaceTime people. So if you can FaceTime someone, you can record yourself answering some of these questions. That's the best practice. There's no judgment, and you can figure out the things that you want to say and the things that you want to omit. Just always remember to just explain why you applied, what brought you here, what interests you about the role. We always want to know that when we're interviewing as well. And try your best to connect your story to the organization that you work for, or that you want to work for, or the role that you're trying to fulfill. So if you're a new graduate, you want to expand on your experience that you've acquired in the academic setting, and you want to apply it in the real working environment. That's a safe one, but there are others that you can work on that you can add and practice on a regular. I want to talk about addressing opportunities on purpose, because if you happen to make it past the general screening, the person who's viewing your resume at this point is scrutinizing your resume. They're not just viewing it because the recruiter has given them the resume to look at. They're looking, I know me, I'm looking for blind spots. So I may be looking for gaps in employment. If someone put, a GPA that isn't necessarily ideal, if there isn't necessarily a lot of experience or a lot of time spent in one company, those are the things that I'm going to ask. Those are the questions that I'm going to be prepared to come into, even before I met you. So if you know those things are there, don't omit them, but be on the offensive. I say prepare to answer those questions as much as possible. They're going to happen. You could have a number of reasons. You could be someone who worked in the military, and as a result, there were many times where you had to be deployed, so you couldn't stay at a job very long. Just be prepared to have some of those answers, and turn those failures or losses into learning experiences. So, let's say you got terminated from a job. It happens. What did you learn from that experience? Let's say you missed a goal. What did you learn from that experience, and what will you do differently? I personally value those answers more, because it shows a person who's transparent and willing to learn. Because none of us are perfect. We all have flaws. They will ask you a question about flaws, and this is a kind of way to turn it around. And then when I say practice using the STAR method whenever possible. It's hard to do. I found it hard to do at the very beginning. I didn't know I was going to get the job at Amazon because it was so hard, because they tell you upfront that you're going to interview using the STAR method, but it's one of the best methods for practicing. So the STAR method breaks down an answer to every question in an interview into these 4 components. You want to have the situation, you want to speak about the context of what you were doing, the task that you needed to accomplish, the action, meaning how you went about completing the task or executing the task, and what the results or the impact of the task as well. Now, some of you on the call may not have tons of work experience. You can still utilize this method by referring back to your school experience. You can refer back to your community work, your voluntary service. There are always examples where you have been able to satisfy them. If you do have a resume, I recommend taking the bullets off your resume and looking to see if they show 3 out of those 4 elements. So now on a resume, you may not be able to include the situation element, but you should be able to speak to the tasks that you performed, the actions you took, and how did they affect the organization. So I'm not a professor, I'm not a teacher, but I am going to give you homework. I want you to look at your resume and see if they identify these points. You're not going to be able to drive all these home, but you will know which bullets aren't necessarily the most effective, and those should be the bullets that you should be prepared to drive home when you're in the interview process. Let's see. Okay, so don't forget to ask questions, and I'm harping on this on purpose. I told you that I would give you some examples of different questions that you can answer. Now, these questions, that you can ask someone in an interview, these are very general. I wanted to be sensitive to the fact that there are lots of majors and lots of concentrations at John Jay, and as a result, there are going to be a lot of roles that you go into. So they're going to vary, and they will be a lot more specific to the roles that you're applying to, but you do want to ask as many questions as you possibly can. I lean into culture. So when I go and I apply for roles now, I look at organizations that fit my comfort zone. I would never go into, I shouldn't say never, I would prefer not to work in the finance industry or the legal industry specifically, because I don't like wearing shoes anymore. Like I like wearing, I'll be honest, I know it's superficial, but I'm a sneaker kind of guy. I mean, I will dress up when I have to. I will put on a suit, and I have them should I need to. And there are instances when I have to, but most of my clients are business casual. You know, my executive directors at the nonprofits I work at now are in jeans and sneakers, you know, and we're preparing for fundraising events. So I knew that was something that I valued. You know, I also value my time. So I wouldn't necessarily work in an organization